Well, there have been some really smart people over the course of history that have made some really bad decisions. Like, who remembers going to Walmart with the roll of film out of one of those disposable Kodak cameras, and you could not wait to see what pictures actually turned out? It was a surprise every time you went. Well, Kodak actually had the opportunity. They were one of the first companies to invent a digital camera. And rather than going into the digital camera market, they decided that, physical film was going to be the way of the future. And unfortunately, the past is history, because in 2012, Kodak filed bankruptcy. Or who remembers going to Blockbuster on a Friday night? Like, if you went to Blockbuster on a Friday night, it was going to be a good night. There's no telling what you're going to come home with. Back in the early 2000s, Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy out Netflix. And they said, no, we think that the retail store is going to be the way of the future. Obviously, that was not a great decision. Also, back in the early 2000s, Manchester United, a soccer club, had the opportunity to sign a young talent named Lionel Messi. But they decided not to at that time, because the coach at the time felt like Messi had not proven himself enough and was a little too small to be a great player. And if you've heard the name Messi, you know how bad of a decision that actually was. So there's been plenty of decisions made in the course of history by really smart people that were just really, really wrong. And it's easy to look at somebody else's bad decisions and say, man, what a colossal mistake. But I know for you, the same is true that is true for me. It's that, I've made many bad decisions in my own life. Some that we've turned into stories, right? You've been able to share those stories, and some of those decisions that you're still living with. But here's the thing. The vast majority of those bad decisions could have been avoided. And so for the last couple of weeks, we've been in this series called The Road to Better, and it's really the road to better decision making. And the Bible has a lot to say about why we make the decisions that we make. And one of the reasons why is because we're on different journeys. The journey we should be on in order to make good decisions is the journey for truth. Like, the reason people make bad decisions is not because there's a lack of information. There's more information available today than in any other time in human history. There's more highly educated, more highly skilled people today than have been on the planet probably since humanity began. The problem is that we don't find ourselves on a journey for truth. We're not necessarily looking for what is right and what is true. Oftentimes we find ourselves on a journey for happiness. What will make me feel good? So just last week, I went to one of those nutritional stores, that sells the loaded teas. And I bought this drink that was 30 ounces, and it was loaded with caffeine and with protein. And I was really pumped about it. And the young lady rang up the drink. It was $9. $9 for a drink. Now, you got to understand something about me. I'm not a coffee drinker. I've not been conditioned by Starbucks that $9 for a drink is just normal. And I loved that drink. It tasted so good. It made me feel so good. I didn't go back the next day. I fought the urge, and I haven't been back. But I'm not going to pretend like I'm never going to go buy another $9 caffeine protein drink ever again, because it made me feel good. Have you ever gone shopping when you had a closet full of clothes, maybe even some that still have the tags on them? Why did you go? Well, you may have justified it with a bunch of different reasons, but the honest reason is just because wearing something new makes you feel happy. Or have you ever traded in your phone? It was only a year old because you wanted the new model, and you came up with reasons. The battery's not quite as good. There's new operating software. You justified it, but you did it because it made you happy. We make some of these decisions because we're on a journey for happiness, not always on a journey for truth. But then there becomes this moment where the journey to truth and the journey to happiness part ways. And we find ourselves at a fork in the road. And we've got to make a decision. Which path am I going to take? And that gap is oftentimes what leads us to making the decisions that are not best for us. And then we have to learn to live with the truth that happy today does not always equal happy tomorrow. I felt really good about it today, but tomorrow's gotten here and I don't feel near as good about it. Like if you've ever gone and bought a new car and you were like, I can afford the payment. And you could afford the payment until inflation kept increasing. And then what was a joy to drive is now a burden to pay for. What was happy today does not always lead us to feeling happy tomorrow. And the question we must ask ourselves is, why do we get into this situation? Why do we find ourselves, rather than living on a journey of truth? Because I honestly feel like the vast majority, if not all of us in this room, even anybody watching online, if I were to ask you, which do you think is going to take you to a better place, being on a journey for truth or a journey for happiness? I think the vast majority, if not all of us, will say the road that ultimately leads to a better place is the journey to truth. But then why do we find ourselves taking the opposite road? Why do we find ourselves on this journey to happiness? It's because of an idea that I did not come up with, but I have lived out many times. It's just simply nobody lies to you more than you lie to you. And I know you cannot stand, just like me, cannot stand to be lied to. Somebody lies to you, you instantly break trust, and you say, it's going to be a long time till I trust you again. But nobody's lied to you more than you have. You have become a dishonest salesperson so many times in your life, convincing yourselves of ideas that you really think are good. Because you go through this process of justification, right? You make that decision. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pursue a journey to happiness. We don't word it that way because then all of a sudden we're being completely honest. We start to justify and say, well, the reason why I did that was because, and our head kicks into high gear and we start convincing ourselves of different reasons why we've made the decisions that we've made. Excuses, justifications, it's all our heart kicking into overdrive, working overtime to convince us of something that's not necessarily true. But we haven't cut ourselves off from us. We haven't broken trust with ourselves. And listen, I'm the king of justifying my own action. So if you're like, you know what? You're probably right. I probably have lied to myself more than anybody else in my life. Welcome, you're in good company. I'll lead the charge because I'm first in line at lying to myself more than anybody has ever lied to me. But why is it like that? It doesn't sound good, does it? Like if we just ended the lesson, we're all walking out the door and we're like, well, that was real encouraging. Whew, glad I went to church today, feeling real good about myself. I'm doomed. So back around 600 BC, there was this Old Testament prophet named Jeremiah who lived. And he was a prophet, actually one of the last prophets that God was going to send to the kingdom of Judah. And he would go to speak to the king and to the rest of the people to tell them, hey, the decisions that you're making, this is the path that it's going to lead you down. If you keep making these decisions, it's going to result in destruction. And their struggle in that day was they were constantly getting caught up in idolatry. They got their minds and hearts off of God, and they started chasing after what they thought would make them happy. Because they wanted to be like everybody else. They wanted to worship and to get involved in all the other religions just like all their neighbors. And Jeremiah comes on the scene and he keeps telling him, this is not good. The place this is leading is a place of destruction. Eventually, God's going to have enough and he's going to send us off into captivity. In fact, he told them God's going to send the Babylonians to overtake them. And the last king that he's going to tell is a guy by the name of Jehoiakim. And he would tell the King Jehoiakim, one of Israel's bad kings, one of Judah's worst and last bad kings. Hey, Jehoiakim, if you keep doing this, if we keep headed this direction, God's going to send us into exile. And eventually, Jehoiakim and the people of Judah got tired of listening to Jeremiah. So he threw him in jail. And Jeremiah was sitting in jail actually when Babylon came and invaded Judah, destroyed Jerusalem, tore down the temple, and carried a lot of people off into captivity. And Jeremiah had this revelation, this discovery about the condition of each of us. And here's what he said. He said the heart. The heart. The heart, it's encompassing of all hearts. Your heart, my heart, every person's heart. Now, he doesn't mean the beating muscle in your body. He's talking about this connection between mind and emotion, okay? The heart, the center of everything as to why you make the decisions that you make. When you think about the heart, you're talking about what's passionate. You're talking about how you get emotionally connected to a decision, to a situation, that center of where you make every decision. That's what he's talking about. The heart. And he just overgeneralizes, but he hits the nail on the head. It includes you and it includes me. What's wrong with the heart? The heart is deceptive. He does not say it's dishonest. Dishonest is like if you've ever exaggerated on a resume or a job application. Maybe it was a little exaggeration on the job title, or you said you did a little more than you actually did. That's just being dishonest, and people figure that out pretty quick. Deceptive is completely different. Deceptive is like if you're at the gas station and somebody comes up to you and starts to have a conversation with you. They distract your attention this way so that their partner in crime can come break into your car and steal your wallet. That's deceptive, intentionally engaging in an activity that is going to trick you. And that's what Jeremiah says your heart is out to do. Your heart is out to trick you. Your heart is out to completely lie to you, but to lie to you in a way that you don't fully understand that that's what it's doing. Which is why the advice of our current culture that says follow your heart is about the worst advice ever. Why would you ever follow a liar? If someone came up to you and said, hey, I'm a liar, do you want to follow me? You'd be like, no. But yeah, we're like, oh, I'm going to follow my heart. Why did you do that? Because my heart told me to do it. I'm just going to follow my heart. That's going to lead me to all of my hopes and dreams. No, it's not. It's going to lead you to lie after lie after lie. Because Jeremiah said the heart is deceitful, and the dangerous thing is you don't even know it's happening, which is why it's deceit. It's not just lying and dishonesty. It's intentional tricking and deception to where you don't fully know what's going on until it's too late. It's deceitful above all things. It's what we just said. It's lying to you more than anybody else. Your heart lies more than a pathological liar. It's deceitful above all, and it's beyond cure. Well, that's encouraging, Jeremiah. There's no medicine, there's no vaccine, there's no magic pill, there's no seminar, there's no book you can read, there's nothing. There's not a doctor that you can go to. Cardiologists can't fix this. It's beyond cure. And who can understand it? I sure can. I can't even understand my own heart, much less trying to understand your heart. It's why you've asked yourself, why did I do that? Why did I just say that? Why was I thinking that way? Or more than likely, you've also said, why did you do that? Because it was a whole lot easier to see why they did that and how terrible of a decision it was than in your own life. And you said, what were you thinking? Couldn't you see? No. The heart was lying. So what do we do? It's almost like if we just stop there, it's like, well, that's not very good because it's beyond cure. But that's where we got to keep reading. In the New Testament, Jesus comes onto the scene, and there's this really powerful scene in John chapter 8. John chapter 8 opens with Jesus interacting with this woman who had been caught in the very act of adultery. And in all wisdom, he told her group that wanted to put her to death, he said, whoever is without sin, you can cast the first stone at her. And one by one, from oldest to the youngest, they started dropping rocks rather than throwing them, and they all left. And then Jesus looked at this woman and said, neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin. And then in the very next verse, it told us right at the beginning of the chapter, right at the end of chapter 7, he's in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles was like this week-long party. It was one of the most exciting festivals that Jews would enjoy together, because it was a time that they remembered where God had led them out of Egypt and led them through the wilderness, those 40 years of wilderness wanderings. And for an entire week, they would live in a tent. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? And I know some of you are like, no, living in a tent would be awesome. No, that's terrible. They would just live in a tent for an entire week. We call it camping. They called it worshiping. I don't really understand, but I'm thankful that we don't have to do that anymore. And so there they are living in a tent, just this week-long celebration of remembering how God had delivered them out of Egypt. And part of this ceremony, this week-long festival, there would be this moment, usually at sunset, where they would have these massive lamps, and they would light these lamps that would be visible from miles away. And it would just be this reminder that God is the light in the darkness, how God led them through the wilderness through that pillar of fire. And as they're lighting the lamps, Jesus shouts out in a bold proclamation, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me will no longer walk in darkness, but in the light of life." Well, that's a really bold proclamation to make in the middle of a festival. And so it sparks this debate between Jesus and the Pharisees, that religious group that were wanting to keep God's law more stricter than anybody else. And they're going back and forth about his identity. And so eventually Jesus is telling them that he is the Son of God. And then in verse 32, he says, "You can know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That's a powerful statement. Where lies begin to deceive and to enslave us, the truth is what will set us free. And he said, we can know it. So what is the answer to a lying, sick heart? It's the truth. Because the truth sets us free from lies. That's always the answer to lies, right? Truth is always the answer to lies. But what about the truth? Well, this is where there's this really powerful word that comes into play. It's that word confession. Now, I don't know what you think about when you hear or read the word confession. Maybe this idea pops into your head, and it did for a long time for me, that if I'm going to confess, I'm going to feel bad about something. And what I'm going to confess is how bad I feel about something. That's not really what confession means. You see, in the world of law and order, when a police officer or a detective brings in a suspect, and they ask them to make a confessional statement and ask them to write it down. What that individual does not do is write down how bad they feel about what they've done. They just simply state the facts of what they have done. They are confessing to what they have done. Confession just simply means to agree with the truth. It means to align yourself with what is true. So when Jesus says you will know the truth, the key to unlocking this freedom, this free truth, this liberating truth in our lives is through confession. It's through admitting what is true. So where our hearts are believing lies and is selling lie after lie, the answer to a sick, deceptive heart is confessing what is true. It's pausing and asking myself, what am I actually believing in this moment? What is actually true about what I am feeling and what I am thinking in this moment? Here's what Andy Stanley said. He said, when you are willing to come clean with yourself about the uncomfortable truth behind your choices, you're on the verge to freedom. We can never be free as long as we're in the habit of lying to ourselves about the reason behind the choices we make and the paths that we take. He's talking about how every one of us in some way gets into this business of justifying our actions and of making excuses over and over again rather than just confessing what is true. And the promise that God makes is when you confess truth, it sets you free. And so there becomes this moment where we all have to dig deep, uncomfortably deep, and admit, well, the reason I have credit card debt is blank. The real reason my marriage ended is blank. The real reason I don't spend time in prayer is blank. The real reason I want to make this purchase is blank. The real reason I lie about this situation in my life is blank. The real reason I'm struggling with an addiction is blank. Not all of the excuses that come up where we begin to self-deflect and we begin to self-justify our actions, but digging beyond that to confess the actual truth. Because when you dig down to the real, honest, unfiltered truth, then God can begin the process of granting freedom and healing. That liberating process from whatever it is that is enslaving you by lies, that process can begin. But God cannot start that process until we are willing to admit what is true Because until then, we will fight back until we say, yeah, this is why. I did it because I thought it would make me happy, and I was wrong. I did it because that's just what I wanted to do. I did it because my heart was in the wrong place. Grayson read this to us. I'll share it with you again. When we conceal our sins, and you can take that word sins and you can put our motivations, our desires, you can put our justifications, our excuses. When we conceal, nothing prospers. But when we confess and renounce, we experience mercy and find freedom. So 3 questions to leave you with this morning, and for me first and then for you, so that we can live with clarity and make honest, good decisions that will lead us to a better place. Number 1 is, why am I doing this really? And don't leave off that word really at the end, because if you just ask yourself, why am I doing this? Oh, your mind will kick into high gear and it'll be like, well, blah, 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 excuse after excuse, justification after justification. But when you say, no, really, pause, really, that takes away all of the excuses. And then I'm left with what is honest. And then I can make a more clarified decision. Number 2, if somebody came to me and was asking for advice in the same situation, what would I tell them to do? And if what I would tell them to do is completely opposite what I'm about to do, then don't do it. And the reason why that's so easy is because when you're dealing with somebody else's life, you're not as emotionally tied up in it. Yeah, you are emotionally tied up because you love that person, but you don't have all of that emotion clouding your judgment, because you can look at their life and you can say, well, this decision and this decision will lead you here. This decision and this decision will lead you here. Where in your own life, it gets reversed. And we think that bad decisions will lead us to good places because our heart wants to do what our heart wants to do. But if I would recommend a different course of action, that's probably the course of action I should take. And then number 3, in light of my past experience, have I walked this road before? Have I been down this road and led me to a really bad place? In light of my future hopes and my dreams of where I'm wanting to go in life, is this truly the wise thing to do? Is what I'm about to decide going to lead me to where I ultimately want to be? Because as we talked about last week and the week before, you get to where you don't want to be the same way you get to where you want to be. It's through making decisions. They are taking us somewhere. And our heart is along for the ride. And that's why it's so important to do, as it says in Proverbs 4, to guard the heart. Guard it from all of these emotions that kick in and that cloud our better judgment. Guard it and protect it from lies by confessing the truth. Because when you confess truth, lies are exposed and darkness flees. Because truth is the light. It exposes those dark places in our hearts. This morning, the greatest truth you could ever confess is that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. If you've never made that confession, you've never been baptized into Christ, then you're missing out on this great liberating life that Jesus is offering to you. Not only has he promised to wash your sins away, all of those terrible choices you've made in the past, but he's going to give you his Holy Spirit. And that Spirit is going to connect with your life and your mind and your heart and begin changing you over this process, over time, of turning you more and more into a person who looks and lives like Jesus, which means he promises to be with you in every decision that you will ever make, and he will guide you into better decision making. If you're ready to put Christ on in baptism, we'd love to celebrate that together today and to witness you being reborn into Jesus Christ. If you're here this morning and there's a lot going on in your life and you just feel like you need to confess the truth, and not only confess it to yourself, but you want to confess that to one of our shepherds. Maybe you just need to have this moment and you're like, you know what? I have been lying to myself for way too long, and I am tired of where my decisions have led me. And confessing the truth doesn't instantly change your situation, but it allows God to begin that process of changing. Because when you change direction, things begin to change. And he promises to guide you and be with you along the way. And you're ready to make a confession today so that God can begin to set you free from those lies. We'd love to pray with you, to pray over you. If you want us to pause as a church family and to encourage you and to pray with you, we'd love to do that. If you need any help this morning, please let it be known as together we stand and sing.